Okay, Tom, sorry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Today's talk counts towards 1.25 learning units, which will be reported back to the AIA. We'll be recording this session and we'll provide a link on our website in the coming weeks. My name is Libby Barnes, and I am the Committee on the Environment Director for the AIA Monterey Bay. The AIA Committee on the Environment works to advance, disseminate, and advocate design practices that integrate built and natural systems and enhance both the design quality and environmental performance of the built environment. If this topic interests you, please contact me if you'd like to serve on the committee. Please use the chat to post questions. We'll answer them live at 1 p.m. You may also ask questions live, which we encourage. So you just have to unmute yourselves. Today's talk is called Challenges to Building Electrification and the Microenergy Grid Solution, presented by David Knight and Abe Stalcup of Monterey Energy Group. I'm sure all of you have worked with these guys, and we're really happy to have them share their knowledge on this subject matter. So without further ado, I'll have them take it away.
Okay, thank you, Libby, and thanks for having us. Hi, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Challenges to Building Electrification and the Microgrid Solution. Here are the topics we will cover: all electric mandates, the process to properly size and design a microgrid. This includes Title 24, vast amount of owners' inputs, enhanced building energy use modeling, as well as properly sizing solar electric production and energy storage systems. We will be demonstrating the economic value of microgrids and, of course, the aesthetic considerations and space requirements. My name is David Knight, and 40 years ago, I founded the Monterey Energy Group. I'm joined by my partner and our head engineer, Abe Stalcup. Please feel free to email or use the chat box for questions or that sort of thing. We will have this presentation in a document form that we will distribute later, as well as full presentation notes. Thanks again for attending today. All right, next slide, Abe. All electric mandates are coming at you from all angles: Title 24, local reach codes, AIA 2030 challenge, as well as from ownership. If you are new to California, you might be thinking that our state must have exceptionally low electric rates. And if not maybe low electric rates, we must have extremely solar-friendly net metering regulations. One might also assume for the state to enact an all-electric mandate on all new homes, detached ADUs, and multifamily projects, our existing electric grid must have vast extra capacity, and our electric utilities must be a model of efficiency, and tying into the grid must be easy, cheap, and fast. Next slide. I wish all that was true, but of course it's not. In fact, just the opposite is true. Our electric rates are the second highest in the USA, just behind Hawaii. Late last year, California's super solar-friendly annual net metering rates, known as NEM 2.0, was replaced by NEM 3.0. More on this later, but basically for solar production to have any economic value, the electricity produced must be consumed on site. I'm also sure you've noticed that the cost and time to hook up to the electric grid, if it's available at all, has increased dramatically. At the same time, the reliability of our high-price electric grid is only getting worse. That is the situation today. Now, let's add the demand of building electrification, transportation electrification, and the demand of AI computing power. Real fast, computing accounted for 1% of California's total electric demand in 2018, 5 years ago. Today, it's 3%. The projection is that by 2030, it will be 20% of the total electricity consumed in California will go for computing power. Anyone who thinks that all that demand will create a lower cost and more reliable electric grid should probably apply for a job at the local planning department. Too harsh? Anyway, that is the challenge of building electrification. And we believe that designing buildings with a microgrid is a very viable option. Next slide. To make these issues a little easier to explain, we'll be using a case study house where the main res and the detached ADU total 3,500 square feet. The project is just getting permitted. It's located here in Climate Zone 3, a fresh lot, all electric, modern design with 50% glass to floor area, but it is really well insulated. The house does meet the current Title 24 energy code with a 0.4% compliance margin. Now, for most homes in California, this is where the energy engineering stops. It meets Title 24 and it meets the solar mandate, so all must be well. Well, in the words of Lee Corso, not so fast. Next slide. Proper energy modeling predicts 3 significant problems. To start, the first year operating costs, even with the solar electric system meeting the solar mandate, will be about $5,500. With mainstream kind of middle of the road current projections of electric grid inflation, the 30-year operating cost for this project will be around $500,000. Your client is expecting an efficient net zero energy house. However, their operating costs will be far from zero. Further, the cost to bring a 600 amp service from the street to the house is estimated to be around $75,000. Why 600 amps? By the way, it's not that far from that. The street isn't that far away. Why 600 amps? You've got electric space heating, domestic hot water heat, electric domestic hot water heating, electric pool heating, electric car charging. It's a house and an ADU. So you've got 2 induction cooktops at 50 amps a pop. You got 2 electric clothes dryers. You have recirc pumps. This is only a 3,500 square foot house, but it still calcs out at 600 amps. If you recall that this project, when meeting the solar minimum, did beat the energy code by 0.4%. With a properly designed microgrid, which is just a fancy way of saying the right amount of PV combined with the right amount of energy storage, both battery and thermal, now complies by over 38%. Why is this valuable? Well, you can now basically Title 20 comply any building envelope, no matter how much glass in any part of the state. Another value of microgrids. With that, let me turn over this presentation to Abe, who will go through the process to properly size a microgrid, as well as how best to integrate a microgrid into your next project.
Good morning. All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. As Dave mentioned, my name is Abe Stalcup, David's partner, head engineer. This is my 28th year with Monterey Energy Group. So welcome. I am excited to talk to you guys about microgrid. So let's get into it. What exactly is microgrid? Simply put, microgrid is a small scale home or business power grid using multiple power sources and energy storage, typically consisting of the utility, solar PV, of course, energy storage systems. You'll see ESS, often referred to more commonly as battery storage. What we refer to as an energy management hub. You'll often hear the terms hybrid inverter and other terms, sometimes with or without a generator. And just recently, I'm going to get a little bit into this a little later, is bidirectional car charging. Now, if you look in your upper right there, I crossed out the utility, and you might be thinking, well, what does he mean? Well, we also are starting to see a surge of off-grid projects. Even though they have the ability to connect to the utility, owners are choosing to say, I don't want to, for various reasons, more of which we will get into. So how do we implement? We here at Monterey Energy Group pretty much spent the last year working on the microgrid process. What we've done is we've broken it down into kind of a 3-phase process. It begins with discovery. So the discovery phase basically is information gathering. And then we're going to hand this over back to Dave, who's going to talk to you about step 1 of the discovery phase, and that is the Title 24 code updates.
Yeah, we're really throwing this in because originally we were asked to talk about Title 24, but to be honest, Title 24 really didn't change this latest version. Everything else changed. Net metering changed. The solar tax credits got better. The all electric mandates got brought in. But in general, the Title 24 really didn't change at all. We still have a solar mandate, well, except for the all electric portion of that. And it's almost all the time, but I'll explain here in a second. We still have a solar mandate, but it's a tiny amount of solar, usually 2 to 3 kilowatts. There are some exceptions for small ADUs, anything under 500 square feet. is usually exempt from the solar mandate, something to keep in mind. There's also new solar mandates on non-res projects, certain types, there's like 10 types of buildings, office buildings, things like that, that now require solar and energy storage. For additions and remodels, it's still possible to use gas, but you got to be a little cautious because there are some mandates coming, around the corner in California that will outlaw. Let's say if your water heater breaks or your furnace breaks, if you can repair it, great. But if you have to replace it, they're going to want you to use an electric heat pump. The other change in this year's code is it is kind of a combination of efficiency and energy storage or energy source. The efficiency stayed the same as the last code, but the energy source, which is basically gas or electric, if you choose electric, you tend to comply very, very easily. If you choose gas, it's almost impossible in most cases. Now, hang on. A word of warning, sorry. A word of warning is 2025, which sounds like a long ways away, but it's not really, That's when the hammer comes down on the building envelope. It may not require triple glazed windows, but maybe on some jobs it will. It just is going to be much harder on the building envelope. Lastly, the one thing that we're, we don't want to in any way shortchange the efficiency of the building, because when you have the electric rates we have in California, when you have all electric mandates and you have NEM3, it really does, those all equate to, the more efficient the building, the better, as well as a micro energy grid. So there you go, Abe.
All right, do you want to talk about that slide, Dave, or is this you pretty much discussed that?
Okay. I can. What this is whether you use Modern Energy Group or another energy consulting firm, the key part of the discovery phase is something that gets printed out off the Title 24, which is called the Econ 1. And what we do is, and this basically solves for your kilowatt hours per month consumed. It also can show the PV input, but we get rid of that. But what this does is, and this is for your standard, your HVAC, your domestic hot water, your very standard appliances, nothing special, nothing outside the building, no car charging, no well pumps, no swimming pool filter pumps or fountain pumps. This is just the bare bones, but this is how we start our process to properly size a micro grid.
Okay, so step 2 of the discovery phase is we're going to perform an electrical site and utility analysis. Now, you might be asking, why is this important now? Well, before 2000, most of you guys know, most homes were under 100 amps or less. And, it's primarily due to the fact that most homes back then were gas appliances. You had domestic hot water that was gas, and heating that was gas. So as of 2022, California mandated 200 amp minimum, with most homes, as we're going to show you, needing 400 amps and as much as 600 amps and up. So how does this impact the project? Well, just the cost of the electrician alone, this is what we've been finding in the last 12 months of our research, is just the equipment alone and labor for the electrician to go from, say, a 200 amp to a 400 amp panel, $25,000 to $50,000. Then, of course, we got the cost of the utility upgrade. Dave mentioned it. Just to go to a 400 amp often costs somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000, and up depending on if it's more 600 amps or more. Also, some of the utilities are passing on the upcharge just for the cost of the infrastructure. We did a project down in Montecito recently. They charged the client $250,000. And this is a house is just in town. They charged them $250,000 to upgrade the upstream infrastructure required to get back to the last transformer. It's just pretty crazy, all the stories we're hearing about infrastructure and the lack of grid availability. Finally, you got delays. I'm sure everybody on this call has heard all the nightmare stories about how long it's taking for utilities to connect. PG&E easily 1 to 2 years for just a 400 amp service, maybe more for larger. We've heard it be as much as 2.5, 3, and it doesn't seem to be coming down. So as part of our service, we've gained privileged access under NDA to use utilities interface tools. What we're able to do is see how much power is actually available at a given site. This is an example that shows you here. What you're looking at is actual power availability at different transformers throughout this particular town. So we can use this information as part of our process, and that helps us determine upfront cost and possibly wait times, of course, on a case-by-case basis. And of course, we always evaluate any sort of information that the architect and the owner is able to provide us. Often there is a site utility plan, site survey. Our electrical engineer even uses Google Street View. You can look at site infrastructure and often tell just from seeing a transformer, as you see in the picture here, what's available. Step 3 of our discovery phase is to now get together with the owner and architect. And I can't emphasize how important this is to get the owner involved early on a project to figure out and ask the question, hey, what's going to be electrified in this house beyond the standard items shown in that Title 24 slide that Dave previously discussed. Here you see questionnaires of, hey, additional indoor appliances, things like, wines, extra refrigerators, saunas, pool equipment. On the outdoor appliances, additional electric car chargers, things like entry gates, fountains, sumps, wells. All these things obviously play a tremendous part in figuring out how much juice we're going to need. And then also something to note is how important, Dave did mention the HVAC and domestic hot water. We also, during these phase of questions, want to ask the owner, you're going to get to a slide later about how they want to heat and cool their home, how they want to do their domestic hot water. Often it's driven by code, but sometimes it's an option. Second question we like to ask is, what are their energy goals? We discuss budgets, of course, but maybe the owner just wants to provide the minimum. He's all about the front end cost on the project. He's not too much worried about the economic cost, although we're going to get into what a unfortunate decision it is not to consider the long term, but he might want just the minimum. Maybe they want the most economical in the long term, something that we're pushing and why we're having this discussion. Maybe they want to be all net zero, which incidentally turns out to be a most economical system often with our designs. Then finally, we ask, hey, maybe you want to consider that off-grid, that slide I showed earlier. Here's all the impacts. Maybe we do want to consider not even connecting to the grid. Last, very important question is, hey, how do you want your project, how do you want your house to operate during an outage? We ask, do you want that practical solution where it's just a handful of critical loads, things like lighting, refrigerators, water heating, or maybe, some critical loads with some luxury items, maybe a zone of air conditioning, plugs for some TVs and others. Or we've got owners, of course, everybody on this call, I'm sure they want everything. They want it all. They want to live as if the power never went out. Well, we can provide that solution. Finally, how long do you want your energy storage to last? Is it just one day? Is it 3? Is it a week? Often this is driven by the actual project, where it's located, and is it subject to long outages due to storms? We just here in Monterey County, we've got Pebble Beach, which sometimes they're out for 2 weeks, whereas right down the street on the other side of the line, Monterey, they might be out for 1 or 2 days. Sometimes a backup generator is involved, which changes the equation and makes maybe the battery storage a little less important, but we'll get into a little bit with the generator a little later on. All right, step 4 is to size the electrical service. Most of you have probably seen one of these. This is an electrical engineer here. Our electrical engineer has provided. This is our case study house, by the way. He's done a standard CEC calculation that has taken all the items that we've done in discovery phase to this point, all those questionnaires, and we've assembled what the house is going to require. So of course, what jumps out at you? Yeah, the bottom, as Dave pointed out earlier, just for this 3,500 square foot all electric house this house needs a 600 amp service. Solar access. This is step 5. So here you see architect has provided us a nice sketch that says, hey, here's all the available roof areas that we can put solar PV. Sometimes we get ground locations as well, and we consider everything. Once we have the preferred locations, we then use this really slick shade analysis program called Aurora. And what it does is it builds out a 3D model. It shows the roof. It actually builds a 3D model of the roof and shows the panels on the roof. And then it uses satellite imagery to show the trees. As you see down here, it actually will take all the trees that it inside it with the satellite and model 3D trees to ultimately show us how everything is affected. What we get is the top slide here is it actually shows us our solar availability with, of course, as you might guess, dark being bad, light being good. One might suspect north facing and some trees impact some panels over here, but yeah, it gives us a pretty accurate model of what the system will produce over the course of a year. Pretty neat stuff. Next step is to figure out where can we put all our microgrid balance of system components. Meter, where's the meter going to be? Where can we locate batteries? Where can we put panels? Where's the sub panels going to go? A lot goes into these microgrids, and it really needs to be discussed on the front end. The last step kind of previously discussed this, and that is the loads and the size of the HVAC. Once we've determined what type of HVAC through either the owner or Title 24 code driven requirements, some mandates David mentioned, all electric. There's over 100 jurisdictions in the state that currently do not even allow gas connections, and it's increasing every day. So often electrification is just by default. But why is this important? Well, because this is a huge part of the electrification load, and we really need to determine what equipment's going to be used, not only for where things are going to go, but just how it affects the microgrid overall. So we go through these series of steps with the owner and the architect to determine, we do a full load calculation, we figure out the equipment, owner directives, and of course we discuss budgets. All right, so that wraps up the discovery phase. We move on to phase 2, which is optimize and report. How do we implement this? How do we optimize report? We're going to basically create an energy profile now and use tools to find optimal microgrid solutions. Step 1, you saw this slide earlier. This is our standard Title 24, and what this does is the Title 24 outputs the envelope, within the envelope items. And this is just the standard monthly energy use based on the HVAC, the domestic hot water, plug loads, lighting, appliances, basic standard appliances. Let's see what else. Yeah, lighting standard. Then we move on to the non-standard items, which you see here. We've now entered what we found in discovery into our spreadsheets, and we start to build out this energy profile. I do want to point out, you guys see here in red, an electric vehicle. I don't know if you guys realize how much juice a car consumes, but here we are showing if you use your system to charge your car at 10,000 miles a year, you're actually consuming almost 6,500 kilowatt hours per year. And going back here, you can see just that's half of the entire house's consumption for standard loads, just to put it in perspective. Here's our summary showing what has been selected for our HVAC and domestic hot water. So essentially now we have an energy use profile summarized. Down here at the bottom, we now know what our total consumption is going to be. And over here, we have our system size is now calculated. And that's based on that Aurora program as well. Okay, so before I move on to another program, the powerful program that we use to help us with our microgrid design called Energy Toolbase, I want to discuss this utility rate structure. Dave mentioned it earlier, and it's very important to understand. Under NEM3, the current NEM3, most utilities now use what is called time of use metering, referred to as TOU metering. Here's an example of a utility time of use rate schedule. So what's the first thing to understand here is there's no cheap power anymore. You guys can see even these off-peak rates are at 34 cents. There's just no cheap power. But what you will notice is these on-peak rates, both for the winter and the summer, they really ding you hard with these on-peak rates. And by the way, the on-peak typically for most utilities is somewhere between 3 and 10 p.m. All right, so something else to mention is under the rules of last year's net metering, the utility under NEM2 last year, they would pay you these rates. For anything that was overproduced going back into the grid, they would actually pay you at the same rate structure going out. And I'll kind of explain why that's important coming up. Oh yeah, so by the way, average export rate paid to the consumer now under NEM3, yeah, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So what that means is any excess an owner produces going back into the grid, they only pay you 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And what that means is we don't want to send it back to the grid. We want to produce and use everything we produce, and we want to store it and use it on site. All right, so Energy Toolbase. Energy Toolbase is software that uses DOE, single family residential data. It's continually updated with databases of utilities all over California and beyond. And what it does is it takes our energy use profile and then we enter it into the system, and it predicts the annual energy bills on not only an annual basis, a monthly basis, but actually an hourly basis. So we use this program to then determine the optimal configuration for our microgrid. This is a pretty neat slide. This is an output from Energy Toolbase, and pay attention here because there's a lot to unpack in this graph. What this is showing is a typical winter demand, a winter profile curve from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m., a full day of use. And what you can see down here at the bottom, here's, as before mentioned, the peak rate time, somewhere between 3 and 10. What you have here under the red line is the actual consumption curve. So this is actually what the house is consuming from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. As you can see, kind of a steady use during the evening. People get up in the morning, we have a peak use, and it steadies again. And then in the afternoon, somewhere around 3, 4 o'clock, people start to come home and we have a peak use. What you have here in green is the solar production. So you can kind of see solar is being consumed during this period here, but the excess, now keep in mind what I just said on the last slide before with NEM2, this would have just went back into the grid and it wouldn't have mattered because you just true up at the end of the year. But now we don't want to send this to the grid. We want to put it down here, which represents your storage. So this is our batteries storing all this excess solar power to then be used in the afternoon here during this peak time. All right, what you're looking at here is another output for the Energy Toolbase. What this is our case study house that is showing what would happen if we had no solar, no batteries, just to give us a frame of reference of what an owner would be paying. And this could be a situation if you had an all-electric house that was existing, and for whatever reason it was all electric. This is what the owner would expect to be paying on an annual basis. Here is the output for the same home with a minimum Title 24 solar, and no storage. Yeah, it knocked it down about $2,000, but not much. You know, one might think it would be better. It's not. Now here is the same house with our ideal micro energy grid: 14.6 kilowatts of solar, 40 kilowatt hours of storage, which for most of you think in terms of Tesla's battery power walls, this is about 4. It's a little less than 4 power walls, just to put it in perspective. What you'll see here is it's knocked down the system significantly, all the way down to $1,300, with about a net savings of $6,000 per year off of that system with no solar. All right, so here is a little summary. I want to point out some things with our Title 24 minimum and our ideal microgrid system. Here you can see 4.2 kilowatts, 0 batteries. Here's our capital costs after rebates. The payback 6 years because the system is small. You really didn't pay much out of the gate, but what you really start to see over here is what the long-term savings start to look like, or in this case, what it costs you. Over 30 years, the owner can expect to pay $520,000 in energy, with escalation of energy rates, with only $165,000 saving. Now, that same house with our ideal system, we're looking at a payback of 11.8 years, and that's due to the extra capital costs on the front end. But look what it does to the long-term numbers. Now we're all the way down to 237, roughly, more than half, and then with a 30-year savings of $513,000. So we get to this point and present it to the owner. Owner chooses. Owner decides, what does he want? But before I do move on past that, I do want to talk about one other thing here, this concept of the ability to keep a service, this 400 or this 600 amp excessive service, down to 200 amps. What we're doing right now, we're actively working with the local building departments in several jurisdictions. We have come up with a solution. We work with various electrical engineers, and we've come up with a solution whereas it's a hybrid solution of between off-grid and grid connected, where we can actually only use 200 amps of service, that minimum number, but we can provide a 600 amp service to the house, meaning that we're using multiple sources of input. Again, this microgrid concept, keeping the service at 200. So what does that do to the economics? Well, Dave mentioned it early. We've got tremendous costs with these upgrades of services, 400, 600 amps. And if you just took the delta of what we figured out to be 75,000 between the two systems, you could see what it does to the payback, the return on the investment, under 3 years. All right, so that wraps up phase 2, the optimize and report phase. Now we get into phase 3, which is to produce a schematic design. Now that we have all the pieces to the puzzle from phase 1 and phase 2, the only thing left to do is put it all into this format that everyone on the design team and the pre-build team can understand in order to push an overall electrical and energy strategy forward with this microgrid. Also having a certain basic level of schematic design documentation will definitely help establish preliminary costs and to see if they're in line with the overall budget. Okay, this is I'm going to back up. I do want to explain a few of what this particular slide is showing. So this is a sheet that's showing a site plan. All our components are shown in the microgrid system. We've got a 1/4-inch scale plan typically that we will produce that shows all the space requirements for the balance of system and microgrid components. We've got our actual PV layout that we provide. And then we got our summary of all the different systems, the energy tool-based outputs that I showed you earlier. We have our electrical panel sizing. Here's all our assumptions that we made during discovery. We summarized it here on the sheet, and are just our notes and round out additional information. Here's that blown up solar array plan. I made this slide because I wanted to show you that, number one is we provide an accurate layout, but in addition to the layout, I want to provide you guys with some rules of thumb. As you see over here, rule of thumb number one is about 100 square feet per 2 kilowatt of panels, or about 5 panels. This system on the left is 8 kilowatts, needing about 400 square feet. For our case study house, just mentioned, about 14.3 kilowatts, you would need about 715 square feet. Under NEM2 in the new rules, the ideal tilt is actually 30 degrees. Now, we understand there's very few roofs available to do 30 degrees. Yeah, some huge roofs might be able to tilt them up at 30, or maybe we have a ground mount. But in general, we understand that we're normally either matching a tilt, or in flat roof conditions, we're just going to have a minimal tilt, maybe 5 degrees at the most. But as you will see, down here, we only lose about 8% over a 30-year term when the system is flat. It's a little more for off-grid, a little more impact when you flatten the panels for off-grid. So here's a slide that shows actual installation of a small microgrid. Here we've got a battery stack. This one in particular is about 25 kilowatt hours, a little less than our case study house. Here is what's called a hybrid inverter, or what we referred to earlier as our energy hub. What it's doing is it's managing the PV input, comes to in here. We've got the batteries, we got grid coming in from the other side, and then it's managing all these different inputs to put into the house, and then also do that stuff that we were showing you on that slide with regards to the peak shaving, saving the energies for when it needs it during peak. It's all pre-programmed into these smart hubs. A few more rules of thumb here. 36 square feet of space for our case study for 40 kilowatt hours. You're only allowed 40 kilowatts allowed in a mechanical space or a storage room inside the house. This is important to understand. There's a fire code issue. Garages will allow you to put 80 kilowatt hours and an additional 80 to 120 outside for a total of 200 kilowatt hours on site. Those rules are changing July of 2024. I believe it's tripling, which for most homes, you're never going to need more than 200 kilowatt hours, but for what it's worth. Here's a little larger system. This one's more in that 80, 100 kilowatt hour range. 3 solar hybrid inverters. Sorry, couldn't find a more pretty garage shot. It was pretty remarkable how few pictures there are of larger systems installed out there. But anyway, something to be aware of. Some jurisdictions we're finding require protective bollards, which do impact, of course, the space in the garage for the vehicle to actually park. So you do really got to pay attention. And again, why it's important to look at all this on the front end of where you're going to put these batteries. These batteries, particular ones, can go on the outside, but they have to be underneath. They can't just be directly in the rain. And it's different for all different battery manufacturers, is what we're finding. All right, I wanted to go back to this bidirectional car charging slide and make a point, and that is, most of you probably are aware how much juice is in your average EV nowadays. Tesla's somewhere between 75 and 100 kilowatt hours. So again, to put it in perspective, what we were just showing in previous slides, our ideal case study house, 40 kilowatt hours. So you have more than double the capacity just in your car sitting there. So with these bidirectional car charging, you actually have the opportunity to extend your use during an outage and still have enough left over in the car to actually get to a car charging station where somewhere obviously the outage is not. Part of the schematic design is we do all the schematics so that electricians can actually price out the systems accurately. This is a boring slide. I turn this slide into something a little more pretty for everybody. This here is a simple system. I want to kind of walk you through. Here's a 400 amp main service connected to the utility. And what's going on here is this is what we think is the most practical system, where the owner said, hey, I only need partial loads backed up. 200 amps is a lot of juice to back up. So what we've done here is we've broken it up. 200 amps goes to our hybrid solar energy hub, which then uses the PV, batteries, maybe a generator to then back up our critical loads panel. Over here shows the non-critical load, so additional 200 amps. Of course, you lose this panel during an outage. Just a side note, though, there is a pretty easy way to make it so that this generator can provide juice to this panel with typical standard switchgear. Some, as mentioned earlier, a lot of jurisdictions you can't do gas, so you're not going to be able to do a generator. In this circumstance, I always recommend a portable generator, gas generator. They're easy, they're cheap, they can plug into this hybrid inverter so that if you did want that extended outage during a storm, the batteries weren't keeping up, you could have potentially some generator juice to provide power. This is an example of a full backup system where we have that same 400 amp service, but now you can kind of see how much more is involved with backing up the entire house. You know, you're going to have many more inverters. You're going to have a lot more solar, a lot more batteries, still got the generator potentially, but you can, and additional electrical components that then need to distribute to multiple sub panels. So you start to get just a little more complex, a little more expense, a lot more expense. We specify all the different components in the schematic design phase, so it's crystal clear what's required on the front end. I wanted to show you guys this smart panel called Span.io. Maybe a lot of you have heard of it. It's a really slick system. It's taking a sub panel, or in some cases, the main panel. It's a 200 amp panel. What it does is it manages your loads, or allows the end user, the owner, to actually see not only every circuit, what's going on in the house, energy consumption wise, but it also has smarts to shut down circuits during a power outage. So when we were talking about that critical loads panel before, it can actually shut off, like say if for some reason the owner had all the AC in the house on the panel, the smart panel, during an outage, the span panel would actually shut down maybe half of those AC loads, or maybe it only keeps on one of the AC loads so that the batteries don't get drained down, say if the owner was away. Lots you can do with these, really slick. Here's what kind of the app looks like, showing all the consumption of the different loads. They can manage it with their app, turn things on, turn things off. We're seeing these go into a ton of projects. It is a really slick system. All right, well, that about wraps it up for me. I'm going to turn it back over to Dave to finish it off.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks so much for attending today's webinar on microgrids. It is our belief that these systems will provide your clients with the lowest possible monthly operating costs, the greatest dollar savings over time, over the 30-year life of the system, and can be installed for similar, or even in some cases, in fact, many cases, lower upfront costs than just meeting the solar mandate minimum. At the same time, a microgrid will provide our clients with true energy security. Libby told us what to call that. Shoot, what's the word, Abe?
Resiliency.
Resiliency. Sorry, yeah, I wrote that down. At any rate, okay, so that's what we believe is the value to these systems. Next slide, Abe. Oh, don't forget the extra Tile 24 credit too. But at any rate, okay. Early in the presentation, we mentioned that the electric grid limitations and are likely to negatively impact, we in the residential and commercial construction business. Here are two local examples that have already happened. In Hollister, a new Amazon distribution center sucked up enough power to limit all other new grid service upgrades, or just new grid service, for 2 to 3 years. They're not sure when they'll be available. In the Salinas Valley, growing cannabis inside uses enough power to warrant a full quarter of a decent size nuclear power plant. There's lots of competition for electrical power in the state, as we've pointed out. Besides the new hookup limitation, blackouts and brownouts are inevitable, and the residential sector, and I would say small, kind of non-essential commercial, will likely be the first to be turned off and the last to be turned back on. Next slide. One of our goals is to provide a specific microgrid design service. This service will include Tile 24, ACA Manual J, room-by-room heating and cooling loads, the electrical site survey, which is critical. In the good old days, architects just had to worry about how much water was available on a site, maybe where the sewer's going, but now, thirdly, and maybe every bit as important, as how much power is nearby. At any rate, so the service will include the electrical site survey, schematic design plans, level plans for HVAC, and obviously for the PV system and the other microgrid components, as well as a single line wiring schematic. For our clients who are not used to providing full MEP plus solar designs pre-permit, We are working with the nation's largest manufacturer of PV panels and the globe's second largest manufacturer of batteries and others to fully refund the cost of this specific engineering service when the service, at the time the system is purchased. More on that in the next couple of weeks. Right now, of course, everything listed above, or most everything, is subject to the 30% federal tax credit for residential projects and 60% federal tax credit for commercial projects. Yes, thanks. And multifamily also. Okay, well, just one last little slide about Modern Energy Group. I founded Modern Energy Group 40 years ago, about a day after I learned how to do residential Title 24 calcs. Our goal has always been to be able to provide the local architectural community with reliable energy consulting. Over the years, we've expanded our energy-related engineering services to include full MEP and full solar designs. Next slide. Last slide too, yeah. Thanks to the architects around the state, we've managed to stay pretty busy over the years. In our spare time, we have had on occasion worked with manufacturers to provide, better products. Here are some recent examples. We worked with Samsung to provide ways to hide their ductless mini splits, resulting in a relatively low cost, attractive, efficient, zonable electric HVAC option. Other manufacturers will follow their lead. Abe in our office designed a flush-mounted chilled water ductless fan convector for a Belgian manufacturer named Yaga, and that product is being sold all over the world. We get a nice Christmas card from Yaga, thanking Abe for his time and effort. No money, but it's heartfelt thanks. Abe is also on the advisory board of a hydrogen storage startup called Lument. More on that in the next couple of months, but we are very excited about our work with Lument. Recently, after a 3-year struggle, I finally received approval for a 1-tank solar electric to heat pump water heating system using LG's new heat pump water heater. Again, more on that in the next few weeks. FYI, the Title 24 credit from the ductless mini splits combined with the PV to domestic hot water heater combined with the microgrid is insane. And that's no coincidence. We are always looking for ways to combine our Title 24 knowledge with proper HVAC design to give you the building envelope you want, whether it's amazing amount of glass or just whatever it is. Anyway, and then also, we became a founding partner in the USA's Active House Alliance. Much more on that program in the near future. Abe is now prepared to answer any and all technical questions.
Thank you, guys. That was great. I have invited people to put their questions into the chat, or you can ask live. Let's see, we have a Q&A. Dan, Karen, excellent, thanks. All right.
There's a lot of information, I understand, but please.
Libby, I was going to ask Abe and Dave a quick question. Back in the day, we never had to use electrical engineers on single-family residential projects. It was mostly design build. The panel could accommodate pretty much anything you put in the house. What we're finding is that it's actually hard to find electrical engineers that work at this scale to do the load calcs on some of these more complicated projects. Are you guys finding good resources in terms of smaller shops that will help with the electrical design of single family residents? Because I know in terms of mechanical design in Title 24, that's sort of a gap that you filled with your own business. But now it seems like we need that on the electrical side of things.
Yeah, you pointed out something that absolutely that we figured out in this last 12 months, and that is this whole discussion, this whole topic is how important it is to get in early. Things got complicated. There is no joke that everything I just discussed, there is some levels of complexity to it that you have to get somebody who knows what they're doing on that electrical engineering side. We work with our own guy in-house, but we work all over the state. So what we've done is we've actively gone out and kind of seeked different guys throughout the state. And we've done a certain amount of educating. It's amazing how many guys I've had to sit down for an hour, almost have this conversation and educate them. Like, this is what we're going to have to do. So to answer your question, Justin, is yeah, there's not a lot out there. They're slowly getting on board. They're slowly catching up. but it's just going to take some time and a little bit of process.
Yeah, it's a great question. We spent probably 10 years looking for an electrical engineer that would embrace doing residential projects. And we brought on board, maybe 2 years ago, someone that basically, we're able to work with on jobs, send one, the goal was to be one source for full MEP, full Title 24 and full solar. And we've achieved that. However, we do tend to, especially from like San Luis South, we work with 2 or 3 really good electrical engineers on those projects. Yeah, it was not easy to find somebody that was kind of, come down to the residential levels. Then of course they figured out the residential projects are often way more interesting and sometimes every bit as expensive as some small commercial jobs or even big commercial jobs.
I see a question here asking what is the lifespan for the hybrid controller? Great question. And I'll kind of wrap that up with all the components. What we're finding, well, first of all, the solar components are now warranted 25 years, some of them even 30 years. The hybrid inverters, those are typically 15 years. So when we do this economic analysis, we do include typically a change out of both the battery stack and the inverter when we do that analysis. We are finding companies are now coming out with 25-year lifespans on their batteries, up to 25 years. So it's evolving.
Yeah, we are working with one of the manufacturers of the panels and the batteries, where it's a 25-year, I forget how that's prepaid PPA. Is that how they refer to it? But yeah, they account for a battery change out. It's basically it's a 25-year warranty on the panels and the batteries. So it's a pretty nice system. And when we came up with many years ago this idea of a solar provided electric rate. It was basically after the incentives, to produce energy, and in our case now store energy, what was that cost per kilowatt hour? And we can demonstrate our cost per kilowatt hour is a fraction of what PG&E or Edison or San Diego Gas and Electric are charging now. And with any sort of reasonable escalation, we can show how much we're saving over time. But the one thing maybe we didn't stress enough is these microgrids give your clients true energy security, true resiliency. And as people start to, have their businesses at homes, in some cases their schools at home, or maybe they have medical issues, relying on the grid to provide constant power is an iffy proposition given all that's going on. So we want to stress there's more to it than energy savings and dollar savings, but same times those speak for themselves.
Great, thank you. Another question in the chat here. What if the house is in the redwood forest and no solar exposure? How do we meet the solar mandate?
Abe, you want to go back to that slide?
Of the
of the LiDAR image.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and skip back.
I mean, Libby was going to say, just chop down all the trees and nothing to worry about, but assuming that that's not the project goal.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So anyway, so what this is basically we just need, PDFs to scale of any project. And then there's a company, as Abe mentioned, called Aurora, and they have they use LiDAR satellite imagery that knows the height of the trees and then projects that the shading on the roof. And then these numbers are basically, how much sun we're going to get. And then in Title 24, there is a, there's a minimum. And I think the minimum is that 70% of the time the roof has to be in the sun. And if it's not, then you're exempt. And I think that's how it works. We get hired all the time. We do it for free, but we'll do the shading analysis for people, especially in the fire rebuild sections of Santa Cruz County.
Yeah, there are a number of exceptions, and as well as for structures, like you mentioned, under 500 square feet.
Yeah. Okay, what else?
Let's see. All right, I think there's just some notes in the chat, but not a specific question. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Well, I think we can wrap up this webinar before 1, which is great. Can you guys send us the PDF, and then we can send that to all attendees? Charmaine said she'd take that on.
Bet.
And then we'll have the video just takes a little time to kind of process and edit, and then that will go up on our website in about 2.5 weeks. Let me just make sure we answered all our questions.
Yeah, it looks like Marilyn asked about, how much does a microgrid cost? It just completely depends on the project. If it's 1,000 square feet, it's going to be obviously a much smaller systems in terms of PV production, in terms of energy storage. They can cost a little bit less if we're able to use a backup generator. So it varies. But one thing what we can do on what we like to do is we like to provide the client with 3 options, and let them choose. It's their home. The bare minimum option, the microgrid that is grid tied, and hopefully we're able to lop off part of the electrical service fees, and then kind of more of an off grid. So we give 3 options, and the owner gets to decide. It's their money.
But just to directly answer the question and give you a little perspective, here's those capital costs after the 30% federal tax rebate. So you can see here for a minimum system, but here's kind of gives you a rough idea of that 3,500 square foot house microgrid cost after rebate. So, they're expensive. You're committing to a big capital expenditure, but as we've explained, the long-term benefit is tremendous.
Alrighty.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys. Sorry, Abe, I muted you by accident.
That's okay. I thought for a second I was just talking. No one was hearing me.
All right. And thank you, Charmaine, for setting all this up. We greatly appreciate all the effort you put in, and we will see you guys. Well, Monterey Design Awards, putting in a plug on that. Make sure you get your project in, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.